After months of back-and-forth insults and compliments, the US President, Donald Trump, has finally gone to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in a historic summit in Singapore. It has been hinted that this could be the first of several such meetings, since defusing North Korea's nuclear strategy will probably take some time. The volatile and unpredictable nature of both leaders had many onlookers worrying about whether this high-stakes summit would run smoothly. But Trump and Kim weren't the only people at the table. Also involved were an underrated team of players who were bound to influence the tenor of the negotiations, the interpreters. The critical role that interpreters play in political encounters is often overlooked. They are usually considered accessories rather than participants, but in fact, they have tremendous responsibilities in historic talks such as these. There were fears, however, that Trump might suddenly have decided to speak to Kim without an interpreter present, as he reportedly did with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the 2017 G20 summit. Singapore Summit, historic first meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. 20 Show All Singapore Summit, historic first meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. 1/20th Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim leave following their historic meeting. AFP Getty 2/20th Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim sign a document committing to peace between their nations, amongst other things. EPA 3/20th Mr. Trump holds up a document that both he and Mr. Kim have signed. AFP Getty 4/20th The two leaders reach out to shake hands for the first time. AP 5/20th Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim shake hands as they meet for the first time. Reuters 6/20th Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim walk off stage following their historic meeting. Reuters 7/20th Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim take a stroll after their meeting on June 12th. Reuters 8/20th Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim interrupt their stroll to talk to the media. AP 9/20th Mr. Kim and Mr. Trump look out over a balcony at the Capella Hotel, where they held their meeting on June 12th. Reuters 10/20th Mr. Trump takes questions at the press conference following his meeting with Mr. Kim. AP 11/20th Mr. Trump appreciates the crowd in the press conference following his meeting with Mr. Kim. Getty 12/20th Mr. Trump travels to the Astana ahead of the summit with Kim Jong-un on June 12th. Reuters 13/20th Kim Jong-un travels to the Astana ahead of the summit with President Trump on June 12th. Reuters 14/20th Mr. Kim poses for a photo with Singapore's Finance Minister Vivian Balakrishnan and Education Minister Ong Ye Kung ahead of the summit with Mr. Trump. Twitter Reuters 15/20th Mr. Trump shakes hands with Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, meeting on Monday, June 11th in the Astana, Singapore's presidential palace. AP 16/20th At a working lunch on Monday, Singapore's Prime Minister surprised Mr. Trump with a birthday cake in early celebration of his 72nd birthday. Later in the week, EPA 17/20th U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo answers questions about the summit at a press briefing in Singapore on Monday, June 11th. Getty 18/20th U.S. President Donald Trump arrives at the Paya Lebar Air Base in Singapore on June 10th, 2 days prior to his summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Reuters 19/20th Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim met on Tuesday, June 12th in the Capella Hotel on the island resort of Sentosa, just off the south coast of Singapore. AFP Getty 20/20th Mr. Trump boards Air Force One following the summit. AFP Getty Although he has been briefed continuously in recent weeks, Trump's critics worried that he was not well prepared for the talks and may have decided to improvise and to make seat of the pants decisions. And while there are plenty of third rails for him to avoid, foregoing the interpreter would have been a big mistake for at least 3 reasons. Understanding Trump. Much has already been written on the US president's habitual mangling of the English language. Even language experts have struggled with his strange jargon, jumbled syntax, leaps of logic, and outright vulgarity. So it would be unreasonable to expect that Kim Jong-un would fare any better when confronted with Trump's unique way of expressing himself. While the extent of Kim's knowledge of English is unclear, it is thought that he is able to speak it well enough to chat, whatever that means. In Trump world, this may have been enough encouragement to forego interpreters, but their diplomatic skills are crucially important for diffusing dangerous situations, particularly in face-to-face dialogue. If the negotiations turned sour, or Trump suddenly decided to call North Korea a hold, as he has done for other countries in the past, Kim might not have taken kindly to it, to put it mildly, and the world would have been thankful if the interpreter decided to use the tamer version that Taiwan's central news agency has previously opted for, countries where birds don't lay eggs. Translation scholar Jeremy Monday argues that translators and interpreters are able to intervene where original discourse is particularly harsh or ambiguous, and they often do. As an example, he points to the English translation of a speech by Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez to the United Nations General Assembly in New York in 2006, where the reference to the US president as Señor Dictador Imperialista, Mr. Imperialist Dictator, was softened in the translation to read Dear World Dictator. Filling in the gaps, it is widely reported that Trump generally does not read briefs, and that those he does read have generally been dumbed down, denuded of nuance, and larded with maps and pictures because he can't be bothered to read a lot of words. His approach to the forthcoming summit didn't seem to be very different. Just days before the negotiations, he said that he didn't think he had to prepare very much, as it's all about attitude anyway. Worryingly, Trump trusts his gut over his briefing notes, and his doubters and critics worried he might be outsmarted in negotiations. His propensity for recklessness combined with his ignorance could have landed him in hot water if he decided not to use an interpreter. Indeed, interpreters use their knowledge and subject matter expertise to fill in the gaps. As professional diplomatic interpreter Harry Obbs notes, interpreters traveling with the president get to see his talking points, an 8,200-page briefing book. They will study it carefully and should be able to communicate the nuances that escape Trump. For the record, a climate of paranoia hangs over any diplomacy with North Korea, and spoken conversations are particularly sensitive. During previous meetings between U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and North Korean leaders, CIA agent Andrew Kim apparently used his Korean language skills to make sure that the North Korean interpreters were conveying his messages accurately. And, with U.S. officials expecting Chinese intelligence to have spied on discussions at the meeting today, it was vital that the meeting was recorded as accurately as possible to mitigate against any misinformation or misapprehension. Trump needed an American interpreter there to produce a record. Indeed, Obbs argues that the interpreter's notes are the only way to guarantee that an official written record of the meeting was produced for the U.S. National Archives and for the Secretary of State. After all, the North Korean record of such a meeting might present quite a different version of events. It is vitally important that Trump does not shut out his interpreters. Interpreters are much more than conduits for conversations between other individuals, and they are crucial for keeping Trump out of diplomatic trouble. But since the president reportedly wants to go big or go home, it's fair to say that we should expect the unexpected. Severini Hubsher-Davidson is head of translation at the Open University. This piece originally appeared on The Conversation.